Hi, I'm Nawtej and welcome to my podcast. And this week I am talking about investing in AI and why many investments could fail. And again, I'm going to be talking about ambidextrous thinking and ambidextrous leadership in terms of investing in AI. In my forthcoming book about ambidextrous leadership and successful adoption of AI, I go into great detail about ambidextrous thinking as the operating logic and something called the cycle, the operating system for the operating logic of ambidextrous leadership. But today, as I said, I'm going to be talking about AI and investing in AI and how ambidextrous leadership can help that. So first, let's just look at where most of the world is now. There's an illusion of progress, whether it's across organizations, individuals, or institutions or governments. AI adoption often looks or can look impressive from the outside world. You get dashboards, models, pilots, automation, data lakes, and it feels like progress. Tools, databases, and dashboards particularly, they look like process. But when we look closer, something is missing. Decisions aren't fundamentally better, strategies aren't clearer, and most importantly, in my book, learning is not compounding. And why is that? In my view, it's because we're building tools, but we are not building systems. So we're improving some tasks, but we're not improving outcomes. And that's the main thing. Tools are seductive because a dashboard with many colors and arrows pointing in different directions and information flows, they look very attractive. It's only surface level. A system is much more powerful than a tool. So before we go any further, before we get into the ambidextrous nature or the nature of why ambidextrous thinking is a good solution for investing in AI, let's define a system, make it more concrete. A system is not just a collection of technologies. It's an integration of data, insight, human judgment, execution, most importantly, learning. And it's the architecture, as I say, that connects all this. It becomes more coherent if it becomes a connected architecture between all these things rather than just a tool. Technology looks good on a screen. With a system, the system that I called last week, and I'm going to call again, a cognitive infrastructure. You get a cognitive infrastructure. With that cognitive infrastructure, you get learning, you get better insight, you get action, which leads to learning and leads to better action. When artificial intelligence meets a weak system, what happens is that it accelerates failure. When AI meets a system, it scales much faster. So if your system is strong, AI becomes a multiplier of intelligence. It augments the humans, the data, the learning, the judgment, the execution, the decision making. It augments that system. But if your system is fragmented into a series of tools, AI could become a multiplier of confusion. And in that regard, therefore, AI has failed. Sure, you get faster decisions, you get faster bad decisions, you get scaled inefficiencies, you get a lot of data, but there's less clarity in your data. So these are some of the reasons why AI with AI tools can lead to failure, and therefore it looks as though AI is failing. But the reality is that investment in AI at this point, if it's investing in tools, it just probably stops too early. It hasn't gone on to think in terms of the system. It hasn't gone on to create a cognitive infrastructure. And again, this is where we enter ambidextrous thinking. So for successful AI implementation, adoption, a different kind of thinking becomes essential beyond tools. At its core, ambidextrous thinking is about holding two modes, two trains of thought at once. There's the explore mode, experimenting, innovating, trying new tools, and there's the exploitation mode, which is integrating, refining, and scaling. And most organizations lean heavily to one or the other. Many organizations don't do the exploration, and many organizations lean heavily towards exploring new tools. That integration hasn't taken place. Ambidextrous thinking and leadership allows those two trains of thought to be held together. They then become a force multiplier. With exploration, you get experimentation. If we're not holding those two trains of thought, exploration and exploitation together, then what happens is that the infrastructure doesn't take place. The cognitive infrastructure that is the thinking that supports successful AI infrastructure, that doesn't happen. So AI investments could fail because they stop at the tool. They don't go on to making the leap to systems thinking, creating a system which is architected around all all of the elements that comprise their business. Thinking in terms of systems is uncomfortable. It's not comfortable because you have to ask yourself difficult questions. How do we actually make decisions? Where does judgment come in? Are we optimizing for speed or understanding? Where are the gaps in understanding? Most importantly, from my point of view, others may disagree, mostly from my point of view, how do we learn? What do we learn, and where are the gaps in learning? Let me just add more about learning. Learning is where the exploitation could be at its maximum, but only if we retain the learning and we continue organizational learning. So none of these, let's think about this. So all that I've just said here about potential failure of AI investment, none of these are technology questions. None of these are about different types of technologies and vendors. These are all thinking questions. So if you're investing in AI internally or externally, take a look at the people doing thinking. Are you investing in the people doing the thinking? This is where I really want to bring in ambidextrous thinking again, because if it's difficult to embed, implement, adopt artificial intelligence with your legacy way of thinking, ambidextrous thinking can help. As a reminder, I said this on a previous post that I did, but ambidextrous thinking is about holding two different streams of thought simultaneously and maximizing those simultaneously. They are, of course, exploring, being innovative, being experimenting, trying new things, and exploiting, which is using to the maximum what you already know. It's about integrating, refining, being a learning organization, and scaling what works into the system. Many organizations, in fact, virtually all organizations, heavily lean towards one or the other. Either too much innovating but not enough exploiting, and not enough innovation. They pilot, they test, they experiment on the innovation side, but they can sometimes fail to exploit. Or they're not really piloting, they're not really looking at new technologies, they're just trying to move faster and faster with either the same or diminishing set of resources when the competition is trying new things. Both of these are traps, both of these are failure traps. The key is to integrate both of these different ways of thinking into one system, into a thinking system. Ambidextrous thinking is that system, combining exploration and exploitation simultaneously. So if ambidextrous thinking is the operating logic, what do we need? Well, we need an operating system. And again, in my forthcoming book, the E-cycle is the operating system for ambidextrous thinking. It's essentially a continuous loop of ambidextrous thinking with components. We call it the E-cycle, or I call it the E-cycle. My co-author and I call it the E-cycle because it's made all the terms conveniently fit into descriptive E words: explore, exploit, evaluate, evolve. And it is a continuous loop of those E's, which is the operating logic or the step-by-step approach to doing ambidextrous thinking. And it's this ambidextrous thinking that is the way to do AI investment, because AI investment is really about innovating and exploiting the innovations consistently and continuously. So it means really that what do you as the either investor or the internal investor or the CEO, it means you have to ask different questions. The question really needs to be, what thinking systems do we need to build? Because the equation isn't AI leads to greater value, it's AI times the multiplied by cognitive infrastructure that leads to value. And ambidextrous thinking is what connects the two. That's the operating logic, and the E-cycle, the operating system. That operating logic is the way to do the step-by-step ambidextrous thinking. The problem with AI failure is that it doesn't fail loudly. It fails subtly and quietly and slowly, and it eats up resources in a way that doesn't seem as though it's failing, because the dashboards can hide the failure. I think this is probably where I leave this week's episode, and next time I'm going to be talking more about the E-cycle, the operating system for ambidextrous thinking. Until then, it's goodbye from me, Nawtej, and I'll see you soon.